Our speaker today, Republican presidential candidate Alan Keyes, is a man of many talents. Over the past 20 years, he's worn the hat of a government executive, ambassador, author, columnist, civic leader, motivational speaker, president of a university, and radio talk show host. And now he's running for president of the United States for the second time in his career. In Iowa, as you all know, he got about 15% of the vote in the Republican caucuses. And in New Hampshire, about 8% in the primary, running at the conservative end of the Republican lineup and watching other claimants to that space, like Orrin Hatch and Gary Bauer, drop out. The only candidate in this year's race with a Harvard PhD and his own talk show, and the only one to have taken the Mosh Pit Challenge, Ambassador Keyes is the former United States ambassador to the United Nations Social and Economic Council. He also served as Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations during the Reagan administration and has run for the U.S. Senate from Maryland twice. Ambassador Keyes is not shy about sharing his thoughts on public policy issues. He's committed to resolving the moral issues presented in today's society by keeping the principles and the logic that he finds in the Declaration of Independence. Of course, not everybody agrees with his take on the issues, but he has seized the public's attention with an incisive debating style and a confidence of expression that is really hard to match on the political scene. He's an absolutist on such issues as abortion and offers radical solutions, fundamental change on issues like taxation, campaign financing, world trade, and welfare reform, just to mention a few. And we have many questions already about these substantive issues. Here at the National Press Club, we do pride ourselves on providing an inclusive forum for serious discussion of large issues. Of course, we're not a forum for campaign rallies, but we are a place where we listen with open minds and ask questions in a spirit of free expression and independent thought. And for that reason, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Alan Keyes as our guest today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I find myself called upon today, I think, to speak in two guises. I always try to speak as an American, and I will also be speaking today a little bit as a Republican, as we are in a primary season. And the choice that is facing voters right now is a choice about who shall be the standard bearer of our two major parties. As I am a little bit involved in one side of that race, I've obviously done a little bit of thinking about the situation in which we find ourselves politically today. And it's there that I wish to begin, because I think by reflecting on it a little bit, we will be able to understand the real nature of the political challenge that faces the Republican Party, but that also then brings us face to face with what I think is the overall challenge facing our country. One fact that probably hasn't gone unnoticed by anyone lately is that we are in the midst of pretty good economic times. Matter of fact, many would dispute the term pretty good. We're in the midst of great economic times. I am not one of those people who goes into the back room and wishes bad times on my country so that I or my political party may prosper. And therefore, I have to take the good times we are in as good news, even though, realistically speaking, good times like this in a presidential election year usually mean an advantage for the incumbent party in the White House. That would, of course, be the Democrats. It would, of course, be Bill Clinton. And I see no reason why this election year will be any different. That being the case, the better the times, the harder the challenge for the Republican Party. Despite exorbitant polls taken months out that showed G.W. Bush or some other Republican beating the Democrats, I've never believed in any of it. Since the underlying truth is that the American people, generally speaking, don't kick you out when they think you've done a reasonably good job. Unlike, say, the British at the end of World War II, you remember that, after Churchill had led them through the war and inspired them against the terrible threat of the Nazi menace, first thing they did when the war was over was kick him out. Americans are more understanding than that. they actually need a reason to kick you out. Usually that reason will consist of the fact that they think that you've contributed somehow adversely to their economic well-being. They'll kick you out for that. If they get the impression that you've been a poor steward of our national security interest, botched up a war, or otherwise embarrassed us in terms of our ability to defend ourselves and our interests, that's a good reason they'll kick you out. If you happen to be like Jimmy Carter and you botch up the economy and embarrass us in national security, the American voter will go into the voting booth. They'll probably wish they could kick you out twice, but they'd only kick you out once anyway. But they'll still kick you out. The point being, however, that if you haven't done those things, if you happen to be a party that's holding on to the White House at a time when the nation enjoys wonderful prosperity and we're creating more millionaires than usual and the stock market is going through the roof and the prospects materially for most people in the country seem pretty good, at the very least, I would suggest they're not going to hold that against you. And at most, they will probably even let you take a little credit for it, even though somewhere in their heart of hearts they will understand that the credit is actually due to them. But Americans have gotten used, I think, to sharing the credit for their achievements with politicians, since that is the way that politicians generally function, right? Where are my people going so that I may lead them? And the corollary of that, of course, is what have my people accomplished lately so that I may take credit for it? All things being equal, therefore, I think that you would have to be living in another reality, not to expect that the Democrats would have an advantage going into the November election, especially if folks go into the voting booth and are voting on the basis of their sense of their economic well-being. Even, by the way, if they're voting on their perception of America's position in the world. And this comes from one who has been no particular fan and never will be of the Clinton administration. I actually think it's been an administration that has been more ineffective, incompetent, and treacherous with respect to our national security than any I have seen in my lifetime. And being as how I was no big admirer of the Carter administration in that regard, that's saying something.